But it's interesting how when you reflect back on a body of work, which is what this space is about, that there are certain markers in your life that you don't know what's going to happen next, but somehow they all thread through when your work's personal. And, you know, luckily I've never been in a violent relationship, but it's interesting how the metaphor of violence can behave when you look back over your experience of love and loss and relationships and stuff. So for me, that's a really good metaphor for what then went on to happen with my marriage. But I think a lot of my work is actually about not being literal, but finding the metaphor, and not abstracting the person so much that you don't have a connection with them on a human level. That's what I've just been thinking about for this talk, that I'm interested in believability and meaning in performance, so that you can, I know it's a real person doing real things with real objects that are found from the real world, so somehow you're already locating yourself somewhere where you're not going, oh, that's a bit weird, it's a bit abstract, it's like, why is she doing, you know, what's that about trying to read a really abstract thing? That's not to say it has to be boring and literal. I'm not talking about literality, I'm talking about metaphor, which of course I think drives most movement-based work anyway. So are there any responses to watching that initial response?
Things are not always what they seem.
Yeah.
Abattoir,
Yeah.
Eat.
Yeah.
I connected to that quite a lot.
Yeah.
Trying to keep it together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Saving face.
Yeah. Hanging.
You know,
Yeah.
What happens behind closed doors.
And that,
how see-through it can be as well, just the simple glass house, how see-through, like from an outside perspective, you can see other people's relationships, but it's not your place to say anything.
Or is it?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've all had that, well, maybe we haven't, but I've certainly had that experience where you hear someone kicking the shit out of someone next door in rented accommodation, or, you know, when you're on tour, and you kind of go, as a citizen, should I do anything?
At what point should you step in?
Yeah.
You should use a responsibility as a human.
Exactly. So for me, that, I mean, that's triggering all sorts of those things.
But I really enjoyed the bit where he was mopping the floor, and it felt like, because I think that you see quite a lot of work that is man attacking women and things like that, and you don't get to see the intricacies of both parties and the attempt of him to sort of try and make it better and try and mop up the mess, and the moment of vulnerability is quite strong in that.
I agree with that, and for me that's a moment of shame, just being on all fours and looking up at the woman in the picture. It's a man kind of, just in a glance, you can kind of go, I'm sorry, or I'm ashamed, or, you know, if you set it up correctly, the smallest gesture or the smallest look can actually say exactly what you just said. So I think that's a really good point of, like, you can read movement really clearly if the intention when you choreograph something is really clear, which it was for us, then it is very readable. You don't have to hammer it home. It can be a look, a glance, a breath, a gesture. It doesn't have to be this huge, enormous thing. And actually, Sean's done a lot of work in prisons as well, but I've done a lot of work with men who are very violent, who have raped and killed and murdered, in the prison work that I did for a long time, which I don't do anymore. And there's a book that I was reading not long before we made that, called Behind Closed Doors, and it's about domestic violence. And a lot of my work has had that aggression, if you like, hovering in the background. It's not explicit, but it's there as part of the fight for equality, the fight for, or, you know, raising awareness around the real issues between the genders in relation and relationships between men and women. Because there is often, and it happens in queer relationships as well, of course, but there is often something around physical strength, vulnerability, who's exploiting who, can we find equality in a partnership? And, you know, the duet form is a really useful metaphor for working through all those seesawing the weights, how the weight shifts literally when you're moving with someone, as we know, physically, but also metaphorically how that weight shifts between two people. And it can be two women or two men. I mean, I danced for a long time at TC, and I was her base, because I was bigger than her and stronger, you know, upper body strength. And, you know, it's like just being really clear about what you're doing with those metaphors, because you can't put two people moving together in a space unless you know what you're trying to say. Because otherwise, you know, we all know when we read a man and a woman dancing together, it's often a love duet or a, you know, you immediately read it. So I think conceptually you have to be really clear about what it is that you're trying to say and how you're trying to say it and what form that takes. Because we're reading all sorts of things before we even started. Just get a man and a woman walking on stage and you're already reading a relationship, whether you like it or not. You know, it's very loaded. Any other thoughts about the film?
A moment that struck
Or
me
questions?
was when he was washing you,
Mm.
and kind of going back to what Tara said about when you see a relationship over there, you can only really judge 80% of it is behind closed doors, and you only see a glimpse. So it's that kind of thing of when you're in like a loving relationship, you might have a bath together, and one of you might like wash the other one, but then it had hints of that like violence that was hovering. You said it looked a bit like, you know, and you kind of seen like films and stuff where it's in like an insane house and they have to hold the person down to like just kind of, restrain them and stuff like that.
I mean, that's not a tender moment in that film.
No.
And it wasn't a tender moment to receive that action. You know, with a cold bucket of water and a hard scrubbing cloth. So yeah, I mean, you know, if it had been a gentle face flannel with a warm, you know, like I do with my son, that would have been a very different image. So again, it's the force, it's the proximity.
It was interesting though that watching that, it did remind me of that soft.
Yeah.
It did me as well.
But that's the
Some of
metaphor.
the noises, like the squeakiness of the tub.
Yeah.
So it had traces
Of course, yeah.
softness in
Because
it.
it's also got the metaphor is that it's a cleansing, but it's not a cleansing, it's an attack. Is it a cleansing? Is it an attack? So those, I mean, that's what I'm interested in, is how one image can be read in a multitude of ways, unless you're trying to go, no, this is the didactic point I'm trying to make. So again, intention is everything, isn't it? What are you trying to say, and how what form do you find to say it? And how rhetorical are you being, how didactic are you being, and how forceful are you being? Because in more recent work, I think I've given much more space for the audience to make up their minds about what they want to read. So, I mean, literally in a show called If We Go On, I left big pauses where nothing happened. So the audience had to go, what are we supposed to do now? You know? And in films like this, it's probably 4 years into my choreographic career, it's just, right, have this! And it's like there's not many... You don't really read that in a way that isn't violent at some point, or aggressive, or difficult, or challenging, or any of those.
Yeah, so that was really particularly interesting with the sound.
Yeah.
So the sorts of images that if it had been combined with a different sound could have been really tender and sort of. I think it was the particular moment he was sort of picking you up and you were falling, and he was picking you up again and you were falling, and that it was interesting, the contrast, because the sound was so loud and it was really sort of aggressive sound, which put this image on it of like he was kind of, it was quite nasty, but it could have been, I was thinking
if you'd had some nice lyrical music,
it could have been you know, him like trying to like pick you up, and it's interesting how powerful that is, like.
And the silence around.
I was going to say,
the moment when the silence comes in, because there's something about the setting, a very sparse nothingness, and then it's really intense. It's very close in the middle. It's really isolating, and to take the sound out after you've had all of this, that aggression really leaves you with a sense of like not being able to speak or not. You feel quite helpless. Just watching. Let alone putting that on the performance.
Yeah, within that context, the silence is quite like sinister, because it's been combined with all of this really dark sound, but in another context it might be like.
But that, I mean, you know, most of the sound, apart from the which John Avery made, most of the banging sounds were almost foleyed, were collected live from our actions. So John Avery, the composer, went running through the grass and got that sort of sound. He got the sound of the wind, he got the sound of the rain falling. But he did, because the Glasshouse is on stilts about so high, we could put lights under it, and also it's got a slight bounce in it, the perspex on the floor. So whenever you hit it, it's really, it does make a thwack. And that noise is because it was really cold and wet. So we didn't know things like that would happen, but because we're all sort of working hopefully intelligently with it, it's like, you catch that sound, and then the soundtrack emerges from the action, which is often how I work with sound, actually, that what we're doing will trigger what needs to be written or captured, rather than here's a piece of music, work to it. It's completely the opposite way around. And you're right, the silences add a sort of a sinister in-breath of like, it's mirroring that thing of like, what's he going to do next?
Yeah.
Is the next punch coming? Is the next drop coming? Or is that moment of recovery before that happens again? So yeah, I mean, it's very designed to make you slightly uncomfortable and on edge, which a lot of my work is designed to kind of pull the rug from under you a bit, so that you can't get complacent as a viewer. So I suppose, yeah, I don't want to feed it to you. I want to leave space for you to interpret, but I also want you to have a reaction. I remember David Hinton, who did quite a few of the Dance for the Camera series. I don't know if you've come across those. He did one with Wendy Houston. I remember him saying at a conference once, you know, he wants his film to physically move you from being here, leaning back, to there. And although you might physically do that, again, metaphorically, you might not, physically you might not do it, but metaphorically you're kind of like, what's that? You know, so it's like an immediate curiosity, a kind of thump in the chest that makes you have a physical reaction. And I think that film's quite visceral in that sense, actually. It's a bit like that. Okay, good. Thanks for that feedback. Anyone else want to say any more about that?
I was just thinking that it just made me think that abuse is not always physical.
No.
So how to put? I was just thinking, how would you put that?
How do you find a language?
Find a language for that when it's psychological. Obviously, that just be.
Well, silence is a good place to start. Like how,
just raise that question.
And that's going back to Sue McLean's show that I saw you. Again, they have pauses in it, but to use a signing language that's a completely different language that I understand gesture obviously, but I don't understand the intricacies of the British Sign Language. But, you know, feeling lost with what's being said, it's not the same as like you talking German or whatever, me not quite understanding, or Swedish or whatever. It's a physical language that you're trying to read in a different way. So I think physically we can say things that words and text can't, for sure. And we can talk about the silences and the pauses by not moving or by moving through silence. So there's loads of ways to do it, but yeah, I mean, it's much easier in a way to show physical aggression because...
Yeah, I think it's just thinking on a personal level, because I'm quite an aggressive mover and can find it quite easy to demonstrate that. What I find really hard is subtleties. You know,
that's the work. Identifying that is the work, isn't it? To sort of how
that's kind of my journey.
Yeah, and also like with Motherland that I made recently, we went out of our way to not be dramatic. Unless we were being really dramatic. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, can we find a way to be really simply in the space and simply introduce ourselves quite neutrally, and then these extraordinary images can happen, but we come back to a baseline that's quite simple. And, you know, it's monochrome, it's black and white with just red, that's it. So it's sort of stripping away in order to isolate exactly the detail that you're trying to talk about, rather than... You know, I think in my early work I was throwing everything at you. Like, have that, have a bit of that, and here's I was really aggressive. You know, and I've had 2 shoulder operations because I used to do that all the time on my right side. And that's the price your body pays for that kind of approach of like, I'm going to really give it to you really physically so you understand what I'm talking about. And as you get older, you actually can't do that anymore. Your body can't.
Well, it's interesting what you say, because it just mirrors, because as a mover, that's what I'm like, but I find as I get older and having a child and as you grow up a little bit, I don't want to be like that anymore.
No, but there are other languages.
I shout with Friday on the tube. You know, it's like finding other ways to say what
But
you
we
say.
mellow, it's such a cliche, isn't it? But you do mellow with each a bit. I don't think my brain's mellowed much, but my action's probably mellowed a bit. But the challenge then is to find the appropriate language at the age that you're at, with the body that you have, rather than pretending that you're still 21 and can throw yourself on the floor, because I certainly can't do that anymore. And that's when I think who you collaborate with is really interesting, because I know that collaborating with Liz Aggis, who's now 63, 4, and with Claire MacDonald, who is, I think she's turned 60 now, you know, those 2 women are such an inspiration to me, because they carry with them the weight of all their experience, and they're older than me, and my ensemble is sort of aging with me now, so I'm not that interested in working with younger and younger dancers, because they don't share my life experience. It's like, how can I bring a group with me, because then we've got a collective understanding of what it means to be in your mid to late 30s or your mid to late 40s, or older, and it's different. You know, you work differently, your pace is different, your body's certainly different, you know, and it's do you do the conventional thing of dancing until you're about 35 and then stop because actually you shouldn't dance, or do you kind of go, my work needs to mirror how I'm aging. My work needs to acknowledge that I've changed. Everything's changed. And absolutely everything changes when you have a child. As, you know, TC's found out, as I found out, as you found out. Everything. So that's something else that I think as women you have to contemplate in a way that men don't, actually. How you carry a child, how you don't carry a child. How your life shifts when you've got those responsibilities, all that stuff. And whether that goes into the work or not. Or you keep that hidden. Because that's another big issue for us, I think.